Welcome back, everyone. This video is going to continue our series on Descartes' meditations by jumping into what I think is some of the most difficult material in Descartes' meditations. In this video, we're going to review what is the task that Descartes sets himself at the beginning of the third meditation. We'll look at what he has to say about the nature of ideas, his distinction between objective and formal reality, his distinction between different levels of reality, and then all of that is meant to sort of form the background for understanding a causal argument for God that he gives in the third meditation. All right, so Descartes in the first meditation raised a bunch of doubts about his beliefs. In the second meditation, he finally found that he could be absolutely certain that he exists, since he's aware of his own thoughts, and in order to have thoughts, he must exist. And then he says, but look, I got that knowledge because I just had a clear and distinct perception of my own mind and thoughts. And so he proposes that maybe everything that he clearly and distinctly perceives must be true. But the worry is that when he considers the idea of a God, it seems clear to him that such a being would have the power to deceive him even about the things that he clearly and distinctly perceives. So this is just the evil genius of doubt. So the clear and distinct rule is then only adopted provisionally. He says, in order to establish it as true, in order to verify that everything he clearly and distinctly perceives is actually true, he needs to be able to prove the existence of a non-deceiving God. However, he has to do so only using things that he has sort of verified as knowledge up to this point. So remember, Descartes has painstakingly applied that method of doubt, and what he's revealed as the sort of knowledge that he has so far that he can have absolute certainty of is just knowledge of his own existence as the thinking thing, and his knowledge of the contents of his own mind. So he's aware of this sort of thought bubble. He knows that there is a mind, and he knows the ideas and things that are going on inside that mind at that time. And so, in order to remove that sort of doubt, he needs to prove the existence of a non-deceiving God using an argument that only uses his mind and the things going on in his mind. That looks like a rather sort of uphill battle. So Descartes then says, okay, let's get to it. Let's look at the materials I have to work with, and let's make sure I have a clear sort of understanding of what my mind is and what's going on in my mind. He says when he looks in his mind, he sees that there are different kinds of thoughts. There are thoughts that are like images of things. He says, to these alone does the word idea properly apply, as when I think of a man or a chimera or the sky or an angel or a god. This is what we might nowadays call a concept. You have the concept of a human being. You have the concept of a fox. You have the concept of a unicorn. You have the concept of the sky, of the earth, of the sun. These are all things you are able to think about. But he says, again, there are other thoughts that take different forms. For example, when I will or fear or affirm or deny, there's always something that I grasp as the subject of my thought, yet I embrace in my thought something more than the likeness of that thing. So there's these other thoughts that don't just sort of have a concept of something or an understanding of something, but they also sort of have an attitude towards it. Maybe they sort of desire it, or they fear. So I have a concept of a bear. That's just an idea. But I have these other thoughts that are not just the concept of a bear, but the fear of a bear. All right, but I can also affirm, I can believe something. I can deny an idea. Descartes developing a view that's common among contemporary views about the mind. It's this idea that our thoughts have a feature that philosophers now call intentionality. Intentionality is just the power of the mind or our mental states or thoughts to be about or represent something other than themselves. So our thoughts are directed at or about certain objects. So I never just have a thought. My thoughts aren't sort of empty. My thoughts have an object. They're always about some object. So I think about my kids. I think about a unicorn. I think about my house. I think about an upcoming vacation. There's always some subject or object that my thought is directed at. So Descartes points out that when we consider the ideas themselves or the objects of our thought, that can't contain any error. Error only ever enters into our judgments, he says, when we form a belief about those concepts. So whether it's a she-goat or a chimera that I am imagining, it's no less true that I imagine the one than the other. We can think about things that exist, like this Diet Coke can, but we can also think about things that do not exist, like a unicorn. But he says, insofar as I think just about my idea or the concept, the object, the unicorn as the object of my thought does exist. It exists in my mind as an object of my thinking, even if it might not exist outside of my thought. So insofar as I'm just thinking about the unicorn as an idea in my mind, I can't go wrong. So Descartes says, now the principal most frequent error to be found in judgments consists in the fact that I judge that the ideas which are in me are similar to or in conformity with certain things outside of me. He says, obviously, if I were to consider just that unicorn as a mode of my thought, as an idea in my mind, and I didn't refer to anything else outside of me, well, then that idea wouldn't be any kind of mistake. All right, so what he's pointing out here is, insofar as I'm just thinking about my mind and thinking about the tree as it exists in my mind, my idea isn't false. It isn't wrong. That tree really does exist in my mind as an object of my thought. Where I can make a mistake is when I have this natural sort of inclination to think that these ideas, that they're not coming from me. And that's because it doesn't feel like they're coming from me. It feels like they're it doesn't feel like I'm in control of them. And so I just naturally am inclined to say that, well, I judge that they are coming from some external source, from some source outside of me. More than that, I also have this natural inclination to judge that the thing that's giving me this idea sort of resembles the tree as it exists in my thought. Now, there's two ways then I might go wrong. It's possible that this tree, this idea, this thing that I perceive in my mind is just created by my own mind, like I think it happens in a dream. Another way we could go wrong, though, is even if our ideas are caused by something other than ourselves, those things that cause them might not resemble the ideas. Maybe it's created by the evil genius. Or maybe I'm in the Matrix and it's a computer program that's causing me to perceive the tree in my mind. So Descartes is pointing out that the mere fact that these ideas seem to be come to me passively outside of my control, that doesn't give me any good reason by itself to think that anything exists outside of me. And even if there was something that existed outside of me, I have no reason to think that those things resemble the ideas that exist in my mind. Descartes then scrambles to see if there's anything else he can notice about his ideas that might give him materials for trying to prove the existence of things outside of him. He says, still another way occurs to me for inquiring whether some of the things of which there are ideas in me do exist outside of me. And so he says, here's an idea. Look, insofar as these ideas are merely modes of thought, I see no inequality among them. They all seem to proceed from me in the same manner. Just considered as thoughts in my mind, they all seem to be out of my control. They just pop in there, and there doesn't seem to really be any difference between them. But insofar as one idea represents one thing and another idea another thing, it is obvious that they do differ greatly from one another. I can differentiate my thoughts in virtue of their objects, in virtue of what they are about, in virtue of their meaning. I have one thought that is about a tree. That's different than the thought that's about my body. The difference here is, look, these are both thoughts and they're same in that sense, but they are different insofar as they have different objects. They represent different things. I also have an idea of my mind. I have an idea of my mind in my mind. And he also notices an idea that he thinks is going to be very special and important. He thinks he has an idea about God. So his idea is about God is different than his idea about tree. They are both ideas. They are both thoughts. They are the same in that sense, but they both have different objects. They represent different things. They have different meanings. All right, so Descartes then appeals to a distinction between two kinds of reality or existence that things can have. There's objective reality or being. Now, this is a phrase that you're probably going to be confused by because we now use the word objective in a very different way than Descartes was using it at this time. But so, objective reality is the reality or existence something has insofar as it is an object of a mind's thought. Formal reality or being is how you probably think of reality, just generally speaking. It's the reality or existence something has independent of its being the object of a mind's thought. It's the reality something has in virtue of being an actual existing thing. So let me give you a couple examples here. The sun, as it is represented in my mind, as an idea in my mind, the sun has objective reality. Unicorns too, though, as they are represented in my mind, insofar as they are an idea in my mind. Unicorns have objective reality. They are an object of thought. But the sun also exists independently of its being represented by a mind. The sun, so we think, exists not just as an object of thought, but as an actually existing entity. And so the sun has formal reality. Unicorns, we don't think exist independently of their being represented by a mind. They only exist as the object of a thought. So unicorns do not have any formal reality. There's the tree in my mind, and there's the tree in sort of outside of my mind. The tree outside of my mind, insofar it exists sort of not as the object of my thought, that is the formal reality that it has. Insofar as that tree exists as an object of my thought, it has objective reality. My idea, though, notice, interestingly, so the thought bubble itself has formal reality because my idea of the tree, the idea, actually exists. So Descartes then tries to distinguish between the different ideas he finds in his mind in virtue of their objects that the thoughts are directed at. He says, unquestionably, those ideas that display substances to me are something more, and if I may say so, contain within themselves more objective reality than those which represent only modes or accidents. So in this passage, Descartes makes a strange reference to some things that have more reality than others. What do you mean? So Descartes suggesting some kind of distinction between levels or degrees of reality. And he refers to two notions, substances and modes or accidents. And he suggests that substances have more reality or a greater degree of reality than modes do. So by reflecting on Descartes' current awareness of himself as a thinking thing, we can get a better grasp on some of these ideas that he's proposing here. So he has an awareness of himself as a thinking thing. You have an awareness of yourself as a thinking thing. So think back to the cogito again. The mind or the thing that has thoughts is the substance. The particular thoughts that the mind thinks are the modes. So think the mind is like a container, and inside the container, it sort of holds a bunch of thoughts. There's particular experiences and memories and desires and goals, fears. All of those things are sort of held inside the container. But the mind itself is the container. The substance is the container. The modes are the things that are sort of held inside the container. So notice that the substance has a kind of precedence over the modes. My thoughts, the modes, exhibit a kind of dependence on my mind, the substance. So the modes depend upon the substance in the following way. Any particular thought that I happen to have, so consider my thought that the purple's the best color. Because it is. But that thought could not exist without my mind. So the existence of that thought depends on the existence of my mind. If my mind didn't exist, if the container didn't exist, then that particular thought could not exist. There'd be nothing for it to be held in. However, this doesn't go the other way. My mind, the substance, does not exhibit the same kind of dependence on its thoughts or its modes. As an example here, any particular thought that I happen to have, so consider that thought that purple is the best color. My mind could still exist without that particular thought. So the existence of my mind doesn't depend upon the existence of that particular thought. So it's for this reason that Descartes says that substances have a greater degree of reality than modes. They're sort of more independent than modes are. Modes are dependent on the substances, but the substances aren't dependent on the modes. And it's for that reason that he says the substances have a sort of greater reality. The modes sort of rely on the substances to sort of get their reality. Notice though, my mind is finite. My mind doesn't have the power to do absolutely anything, so it is limited in various ways. I don't know absolutely everything, so that's another way in which my mind is limited. And so in that way, my mind has finite reality, a finite amount or degree of reality to it. So Descartes then notices that his mind, though, also has the idea of an infinite substance. He can think of a substance that is not limited in any way whatsoever. And so he says this is the idea that he gives the label God. So Descartes does not yet know if anything besides his own mind and his own thoughts have any formal reality, have any actual existence. However, since this infinite substance is an object of his thought, he knows that it has objective reality. And since it's an idea of an infinite substance, the object of his thought has infinite objective reality. And so he says, again, the idea that enables me to understand a supreme deity, eternal, infinite, omniscient, omnipotent, and creator of all things other than himself, clearly has more objective reality within it than do those ideas through which finite substances are displayed. So we can take Descartes' distinctions here and apply sort of three levels of reality, both between three kinds of formal reality and three levels of objective reality. There's the highest level, the second level, and the third level. At the highest level, there's infinite formal reality. This is the reality that an infinite substance or God would have if it exists. Now, Descartes, remember, at this point has only shown that he has knowledge of his own mind and the ideas in his mind. So he doesn't yet know if anything has infinite formal reality. But in the category of objective reality, we can also talk about something that has infinite objective reality. This is the reality that an idea of an infinite substance or the idea of God would have. So even if God doesn't exist outside of our minds, Descartes thinks, but I know that I have the thought of God, so I know the contents of my own mind. I know I'm thinking about God. And that idea is an idea about a thing with no limitations. And so that idea has infinite objective reality, so as an object of my thought. At the second level, there's finite formal reality. This is the kind of reality that belongs to a finite substance. So I know that there is at least one thing with finite formal reality, namely my own mind, since I know that my mind exists. Now, I haven't yet proved that other people's minds exist, but if other human beings' minds exist, those would also be finite substances with finite formal reality. But I can also talk about finite objective reality. So look, even if I don't know if your mind exists yet in Descartes' meditations when I'm going through them, I know that I have an idea of other human beings' minds. And so my idea of your mind, it has a finite reality as the object of my thought. At the third level of reality would be modal formal reality. So the mode, so my thought that the purple is the best color. So this has formal reality, but as a mode of existence, as a way of a substance existing. Then there's modal objective reality. This would be when I have an idea of a mode. So my idea of my thought that purple is the best color. Now that gets a little bit sort of tricky. There's the thought. I can also have ideas of my thoughts. All right. I can have a desire. I can also have an idea of my desire. So my desire has modal formal reality. My idea of my desire, so as an object of my thought, it has modal objective reality. So all this conceptual work, it's rather hard to get your head around, but Descartes' doing it in order to provide the necessary materials for his first proof of God. And the general form of his argument is quite simple. So here's his causal argument for God in its simplest form. He's arguing that he has an idea of an infinite substance, God. Where does that idea come from? When he goes through the sort of possibilities, he comes to the conclusion that the only thing that could have created it is an infinite substance itself. Thus, God or that infinite substance must exist so as to cause that idea that Descartes has. However, the devil's in the details, so to speak. All this discussion of objective versus formal reality and these degrees of reality, that's what Descartes is going to be appealing to in an attempt to motivate and explain these premises. That's going to be the focus of the next video. See you then. Bye-bye.